As many of you loyal viewers know, it's tradition here on the Curators podcast to open up with a little snippet of a song we like. Now, you may know that I don't like a lot of rap music and most modern stuff, but my friend Grant, aka G-Tank, shout out to him, he introduced me to the song by Kanye West that slaps. So here it is.
Damn. Here we go again. Common passed on this beat, I made it to a jam. And everything I'm not, maybe everything I am.
And welcome back to the Curators podcast. Now in its third episode, we have...
Can't believe we made it this far, Tom.
Yes, we made it quite a ways. And, me and Jacob would like to express a thanks to all of our loyal viewers. Episode 1, now at 117 views on YouTube, which
Incredible.
We're quite proud of.
Episode 2 is a bit of a stumble, kind of a yikes, but that's all right, you know? We bounced back.
We bounced back hard, and today on the cast, we will be discussing kind of the topic of why do we read, and then towards the end, we'll be bringing up a little announcement we have for a little plan for the summer that we'd love our viewers to join in on.
Yeah, today we're going to be discussing the question as someone who's had a lot of influence on my writing and love of literature. He puts it as, why read? Today we're going to be discussing that.
Yes. I think Jacob has a very good foundation for our discussion, so I will let him take the floor as we begin.
Alrighty. Well, I think every time you read, the narrative always teaches you something about human emotions and how those relate to you. So by learning about these emotions, whether it's sadness, happiness, cynicism, etc., those are all emotions we all experience. Every book speaks to the human experience, and the more we learn about that experience, the more we are in touch with ourselves and become more full people, and we're able to relate to others more, and that we're well versed in these emotions. And it also improves our writing because we understand we have a good foundation from where to write. Like if we write out of a place of anger or something, you have a better understanding of what anger even is, and maybe you'll write better from that viewpoint. So that's kind of why I really love reading, because it makes me a better person, but also a better writer.
Exactly. I think Jacob's thing about reading allows us to, as Jake said, understand the human emotions and understand our experience. And when we read, we're able to realize things about the human experience that are common. I think everything communicated in a story has common implications for society, no matter how specific to one person a story may be. And that when we read that and when we understand that, especially when we read something very critically and we're trying to analyze it, I think that it really helps us apply lessons and understanding of emotions that come from novels or poems or whatever you're reading to your life, and can help you become a more fully formed human being, especially in times where maybe you're feeling down or upset, as Jacob said, and it can help you learn how to deal with that.
Yeah, the thing about novels is that they're timeless. They speak to the human experience, they're not just solidified in one era. For example, one of my favorite books of all time is Catcher in the Rye. I believe it's set in the 1950s, but it's just some prep school kid walking around New York, pissed off at the world and everything. And it's like, yeah, not everyone's going to have that same experience, but it's about the emotions he communicates through his own story that the reader is able to pick up on it and relate. And we learn about those emotions and how to respond to them and then respond to the world.
Exactly. I think one of my favorite Shakespeare text I've read is Macbeth. And at its heart, Macbeth is very much a story just about temptation. And obviously, the themes of it are intertwined with fate and how we perceive fate and such. But Macbeth is tempted to attain power, to attain, a goal that has been said that this is going to be his fate one day. and he entangles so many people in his deviousness and in his murdering that it ultimately leads to his downfall. And I think Macbeth is a great story about how we can deal with temptation. Obviously, I don't think when we're tempted, we're going to go around, murdering everybody who opposes us. But I think Macbeth teaches us not to push the extremes to achieve what has been set out for us as our fate, or what we are tempted by in terms of things that really don't have all that much value in terms of just gaining power or gaining anything we desire, really.
Yeah, and I mean, just look at how widely celebrated Shakespeare is today. Like almost 400 years later. It's incredible. It speaks to that timelessness of literature. Like, for example, Othello. Yeah, you're not going to be, you're not going to be in his same situation, but you learn about his own fatal flaws as a tragic hero. Someone who starts off comic and has the right intentions, but he has own quirks in his personality. For example, his confidence is twisted. His trust is turned against him to make him more tragic. And we not only do we learn about what Othello is feeling, but we learn kind of like how we can see his own flaws, and maybe we see those flaws in ourselves, and how can we fix that, or at least be cautious of it,
Exactly. And I mean, obviously, much of Shakespeare's writing is framed in the context of being a play, which I think adds to like the element of Shakespeare intended to communicate these ideas that humans are feeling these things all the time, and these are common experiences that, when acted out by people, that can be expressed perfectly in the way he intended, which I think is kind of the most damning thing that any one person could say about literature. Like, literature is the basis for so many films nowadays, because it's able to communicate this human experience that can be reflected visually, and it can go beyond the words on the page.
Yeah, that's why I think superhero movies are so popular in the modern day, is that, our world is all sorts of fucked up, and, it's nice to, like, see these characters who go beyond their limitations and, have this comic ending. And a lot of people draw inspiration from that. It's a lot easier to draw away good learning points from comedy because it's pretty clear cut. I think an underappreciated genre is definitely irony and tragedy, because people get sad at the end of the book and they don't really reflect on it because, like, shit, my favorite character died. This sucks. But really, there's a lot to learn in that. Whether it's about how you deal with your own flaws or your own vices, life isn't going to be perfect. You're not always going to be happy, like maybe Iron Man or something, who is okay. Well, that's kind of awkward because Endgame. I don't know, bad example, but you know what I'm saying. Like, the superhero always has the nice little ending. Everyone's fine at the end of the day. Well, that's not always how it's going to be. And if you don't prep yourself for those moments, then you won't properly respond. Right? It's going to be a struggle at least.
Exactly. And the point of tragedy in the most sense is to highlight those flaws, those vices that we all have, and show how when they take over us, or when they come to dominate our existence, how they can kind of destroy our lives, destroy the lives of those around us. And I think that's a super powerful tool for reflection, because by seeing this really bad thing, it can see it negatively reflected. We can see that negatively reflected in our lives, and kind of teaches us how we can avoid it and not meet the same fate.
Mm-hmm. And if we kind of like take a gander at the Odyssey, that book is, oh god, it has to be at least over 2,000 years old or something. Like, it's really freaking old. And it's, like that, all that Greek mythology stuff isn't obvious. I mean, it's all a load of crap. None of it is real. None of it's practical. But still, that book is widely venerated as one of the greatest books of all time. I guess it's like an epic poem or whatever. But if you think about it, it's about learning about Odysseus's idealism and how that shapes his world, and how he's constantly pursuing his home life back at I forget the island, but his Penelope, and taking back his house from the suitors. And that's incredible because that Odysseus teaches us to live for something with his idealism. And how often in our lives do we just get caught up with the monotony? I can never say that word right. Hope I said that right.
Whatever.
Yeah, the monotony, whatever, of life. And we're really doing stuff meaninglessly, and like with I'm just working to the next day kind of attitude. And the Odyssey teaches us to live for something, and that's absolutely beautiful.
Yes. I think touching on the Odyssey, we can also hit on this idea of the monomyth, that every story is essentially the same story, the hero's journey of, we have a beginning, we have an ending, we have a problem faced, we have to figure out how to conquer that problem, and then, we achieve the goal. And I think in English class this year, we received kind of this diagram of the hero's journey, and something that was initially like off-putting to me was that like the diagram was arranged in like a circle, which confused me at first because I had usually seen like a story portrayed as like a series of like peaks and valleys. But I think when we think about the hero's journey as portrayed as a circle, is that in our lives there's always a beginning to some problem we're facing. We face it, and then we have to overcome it. And that's why the monomyth is like exists, because it's something that in our lives it happens over and over and over again, and it repeats, and it's a circle. And obviously, as in Catch-22, to reference our last episode, we can get entrapped in the circles of like the problems in our lives, and we can go back from beginning, facing a problem, attempting to confront it in ways that are unsuccessful, and then returning back to the start of the problem and not going anywhere, leaving us frustrated and angry. But in our lives, there's two different ways you can get caught in, like the ironic circle or the comic circle, in which we achieve the goal and then kind of begin again with the confidence that we can fulfill the hero's journey one more time, and then hopefully many more times afterwards.
Yeah, and another reason why to read, and you kind of have to be like a little literature fiend, if you will. I get a lot of pleasure from reading good prose and like so well put. Like you ever just read something and you're like, wow, that was really well written, or so artful. I think it really started for me when I started reading poetry, because with poetry you don't get like any plot, you get none of that. You just kind of get these mellifluous sounding phrases, and somehow emotion is evoked from that, and that's really powerful. I think if you're not at the point of reading where you can like where you'll read to like hear these craftily put sentences where it's like just sounds so nice, I would start with poetry, because I always thought, cut the crap, I just want the plot, and then I realized, well, it's not always about the what of reading, but also the how, and in the how you find a lot of art and beauty too.
Exactly. I think when we do read poetry, there's so much technique that we always talk about when we read poetry that an author employs, and that is so beautiful to me, because it shows like such a care and such an effort and such a almost like delicacy that writing has. that an author is intending to communicate this idea to everyone, because when a writer writes, he can write to himself or he can write to a specific audience, but really the audience is anyone who can read it. And an author composes something in a way in which sometimes it may be difficult to understand, but once the understanding is reached in kind of such a beautiful, eloquent way, we can just understand it as a common group, as a common thing. And I think that's really kind of what I love about reading and writing.
Mm-hmm. And again, I think some people, if you really want a powerful piece of writing, you can't just go with the substance alone. In an ideal world, at the end of the day, what you're supposed to be writing about is what should matter most. But we're humans. We like to hear these artful phrases and so rich in text. And if you look at some of the most famous speeches that really want to get their point across, if you look at the "I Have a Dream" speech by MLK, he evokes these biblical images, nature imagery, all these. So it's such. I would go back and read that speech and really realize how beautiful it all sounds. And he's delivering this amazing message of the civil rights movement, desegregation, equal rights, etc. And he does that in such a beautiful way. And we remember that speech as one of the greatest speeches of all time.
Exactly. Earlier this year, I had to write my history research paper on MLK, and obviously one of the documents I used was the "I Have a Dream" speech, not only because it's famous, but because it's something, we hear from our first years in school. But I had never really actually read the words of it, and so I'm writing this paper, and obviously I have to incorporate the document. And I was on FaceTime with one of my friends. We were kind of just talking as we were working, and I was reading this speech, and I was just sitting there holy shit, this is the way, the words he's using, seeing this written out, and when you see something written, I feel like you can understand it way better than when you just hear it. Because when you're hearing it, you're kind of in the moment, and it keeps progressing. But when you read it, you can kind of see everything around it as well, and see the words as they're presented. And I think just with the MLK speech, I was just so astounded, because obviously I had heard the words, hundreds of times before, but it was being able to see them. And I just was talking with my friend, and I go, holy shit, this is fucking fantastic writing.
After being more of an attuned reader, you kind of have a deeper appreciation for all that. I would say another speech that's common, but it gets overlooked. I read it a couple weeks ago, is the Gettysburg Address. That is so well written, and it goes down again as another incredible speech. It delivers an excellent message of the what, and then it goes on to do it in a really artful, cleverful way that really helps to have a lasting impact.
Exactly. I just think that a lot of the time nowadays, I feel like a lot of speeches we hear are very formulaic. And I think that's because a lot of people now have speech writers, I saw this preview for a movie called Long Shot, and it's about it's Seth Rogen is the speech writer for, I don't know who the girl in the movie is, but he's her speech writer, and it's a funny story about how they fall in love, but it's part of the trailer is this guy has to get to know you now, and so he can write speeches that reflect you. And I think with those speeches, the Gettysburg Address and MLK speech, they're so revered because they're written by the person saying those words, and it's their thoughts onto the page, and their thing communicating these universal ideas that I think sometimes gets lost in the modern day.
Yeah, and I think the most common element that's overlooked in any writing is voice. I think if you're able to make the reader have a sense of, this is me sitting down to talk to you one-on-one kind of deal. I think that's incredible. Like, you see that a lot with comedy, but also you see that with narratives. Again, going back to, like, Catcher in the Rye, because that's... Or no, Huckleberry Finn is a great example. Huck Finn, he has a very distinct voice. Twain even, like, writes different words. Or, he spells them differently, like, to how Huck Finn would pronounce them. So every time we get a chapter from Huck Finn's perspective, we know it's him, and it's like he's talking to, like, we can imagine ourselves in that moment, like floating down the river with him, kind of deal.
Exactly. And like with the book Tom Sawyer by Twain, it's all Twain kind of writing that book, and with Huck Finn it's like, it's Huck's perspective.
Yeah,
and
we feel like it's some redneck kid talking to us the entire time.
Like learning about slavery and learning about kind of the reality of America at that time. And obviously, like, Tom Sawyer is a totally different story because it's just kind of this goofy kids story almost about, these kids see a murder in a graveyard and then they think they're going to get killed, and then there's gold around town. And obviously Twain at certain moments writes with like a lot of fluff describing the like setting and like the characters, which is all good and fine, and I really do enjoy Tom Sawyer quite a bit. Sometimes I like it more than Huck Finn, but it's just different, and I think that's a way to emphasize voice, because in Tom Sawyer it's Twain's voice talking about this story of like these kids in rural Missouri, like with this kind of crazy fantastical story. And then with Huck Finn, it's supposed to be from Huck's perspective because it's communicating an idea that is in reality, and the themes are based in reality, and it's trying to show like people, like, this is the reality of the world you're living in. And as Huck comes to realize, that reality is not one that we should be having.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of like jumping off that. Another reason of why read is it enhances our worldview. In these narratives, we are looking at the world through someone else's perspective. Like with Huck Finn, we're some redneck kid, shooting the shit down a river. Catcher in the Rye, we're rich, depressed, hating the world in 1950s New York. And the Odyssey, we're a war hero coming home, trying to save his wife and kid. We'll never have similar lives to these people at all, but yet we kind of like learn to see the world through their eyes. And if we take that idea, I think a lot of people incorporate that, seeing the world through other people's eyes into their own writing, especially like I read a little article the other day. It was like some girl in the Middle East describing her plight, and it was very emotional and touching. Like I've never been out of the country. I live in the center of the United States. I'm white, male, and yet here I am learning about her experience, her woes, and it inspires me to, like, I want to help her. I mean, I don't know what I can do to help her that much, except like vote or something. But I'm attuned to her experience, and suddenly I have sympathy, and I'm seeing the world from a Muslim girl in the Middle East.
Exactly. I think all writing really is about just evoking empathy for the characters we're seeing. Like last year we read Things Fall Apart, which a lot of times I hear people didn't enjoy it. I thought that book was absolutely fantastic, because it is... I'm never going to be a prominent African male or an tribe leader facing like white colonizers, and I'm never going to have faced the thing. I'm never going to have accidentally killed someone and then be forced to be exiled from my village for 7 years. That's never going to happen to me. but it's about why I love the book so much is that it tells this story, this tragic story of a man who is he's so caught up in himself and preserving himself and his family that he ultimately ends up kind of doing these really bad things and isolating himself from the world around him. And that's a lesson that we can take, is that we can empathize with his struggle, because we all want what's best for ourselves and for those around us, but there are certain ways that we may take that can result in us just having these tragic endings. And when, as Okonkwo does, he forces his son out, and that kind of negative behavior that comes genuinely, I think, comes from a good place, can bring about not only the downfall of himself, but the downfall of the community.
Yeah, again, look at our own world and how much division there is. I mean, you don't have to go far to find some, like white nationalist rally or anti-Muslim or anti-gay, so much bigotry and whatnot and clashing of cultures. And imagine if everyone just sat down and was able to write their own story, tell their own tale, and do it in a somewhat fine manner. And I think people would understand, or at least have a better understanding of each other. And I think when you come to understand someone, you develop a deep relationship. And I think they would resolve a lot of issues. But, people are so closed off and unwilling to see the world from other people's eyes. Instead, they just kind of frolic in their own little viewpoints and ways of living.
Exactly. I really enjoy, there's a series on YouTube called Middle Ground. I forget what channel it's by, but every episode is about bringing two differing groups in terms of like belief together, and then like having them sit down and discuss those beliefs, like based on questions. Like they will ask a question, and then whoever agrees from whatever like group steps forward, and then they just talk about why they agree or why they disagree. And I think that is, as Jake was saying, like there's so much division, and we're so divided in terms of belief nowadays, that the discussion and just being able to hear from the other perspective is so powerful and so important in today. And I think that's really what literature allows. It allows you to hear from a different perspective that may not be your own, and can possibly even change your own beliefs in the end.
Yeah, so let's say improving your own self and your own knowledge isn't really appealing to you. Well, because you think, well, what use would that ever have for me in this world? I mean, again, we just showed you how it's like this world view, and has a lot of relevance in today's society, and resolving a lot of matters.
Yeah, just that thing of there's a sentiment going around of like, why do we read and why do we write? Like I would have discussions with some of my friends at school, and they would say, like, why the hell are we reading Catch-22? Like, this shit doesn't make any fucking sense, and I don't know why I have to write a literary analysis on this.
Well, Tom, we had a comment from a viewer named Adam, and
yes,
he was telling us to charm our tongues. I hope this was a little bit better, but that's just, I don't know. I have difficulty chilling on the sailor's tongue, if you will.
Yes, I will attempt to control myself, as it were. In any case, I was just saying that there's a sentiment about like, why do we even have to read certain things and write about them and analyze them? But as we've said throughout this entire episode, there's so much value in that, in reading, just from looking at it. But when we analyze it and are able to kind of discern what it's really meaning to us and what it's really trying to tell us, that's when the true value, I think, is expressed. And you're gonna, in any career path, if you're gonna go into a STEM field, you're gonna need to analyze data and understand the real meaning in that. And I think that's something that's super valuable and is most prominently expressed in reading and in writing.
So with that, should we announce our
Yes.
summer reading plan?
So the Curators are going to begin a little summer book club for our viewers. We hope you join along in our endeavors. Our first novel will be
Should we discuss, or are we in concurrence? Yeah. So
Yes.
we are announcing that our first book we'll be reading is The Great Gatsby.
yes, the great American novel by F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Yes, I'm actually kind of ashamed of myself that I haven't read it yet, but
Yes, I haven't either. So that will be our first novel that we will be entertaining for our readers. We'll probably spend maybe about 10 minutes after we finish the novel as part of the cast discussing it, just discussing our thoughts, why we like it, maybe why we didn't like it, and just what meaning we got out of it. And I think if our viewers would like to join in, we'd love to hear your thoughts. We'd love to hear your comments. Shoot us an email.
yeah,
Comment on the video.
hell, I mean, we can even have one of you guys on here if you want.
Exactly.
We thought about that system of having guests onto the show.
Yes. So if you would like to be a part of the show, maybe join in one of our book discussions, just one of our general kind of topic discussions for an episode, shoot us an email. We'll consider you. We'll get you in the schedule.
Yeah, and maybe put in your own 2 cents about the book.
Exactly.
Ideally, we'd probably want to read this in a week to 2 weeks.
Yes.
But we're high school kids during the summer, so there's no promises.
Yeah, no promises.
I mean, if shit really hits the fan, this might take all summer. But
yeah.
no. I mean, we're gonna try. I have a newfound passion for literature, and that's kind of one of the reasons we started this podcast.
Yes.
was to discuss this love of the arts.
Yeah.
So
I think
that'll conclude our episode 3.
I think that's a great concluding point. Once again, we thank you for listening, and we hope you tune in next time.